I think so. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Jay. We're going to break by 11:45, so remind me of that in case we're getting close to that, and say, shut up, Moyer. We want to go into the legislative agenda, and there are a couple of tools that you have to help us do that. At the back of your binder, you've got a set of blue sheets called Congressional Meeting Talking Points. And then at the front of the binder, you have the Legislative Issues Brief. And in between, in the binder, tab number 2 is the NAPS legislative agenda. We're going to be moving around between these three pieces of information over the course of the next 45 minutes. I want to go back to something that I don't think I underscored earlier this morning that's really important when we were talking about congressional staff and congressional committees. If you look at page, let's look at the House Oversight Committee, page 82. Could you turn to that in your congressional directory? You see there are 40 members of the House of Representatives that are on that committee. If you have, as your lawmaker, as your House representative, any one of those 40, you are in a especially important position for NAPS. Because as bills and legislation move through the Congress, they originate in committee. They can't get to the floor without being passed by the committee. So those 40 people on the committee, on the House side, are even more important than the other 395 members of the House. They are the people that should be the most educated and the most down in the weeds about postal issues. And so, too, the same applies to page 66 and those 17 members of the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. Now, because we wanted to try to keep this booklet pocket sizable, it doesn't have quite as much information as you might want to perfectly have. If you turn to your binder, there's a little bit more supplementary information on page 65 and 66 and 67. On page 65, you see the same 40 members of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. That's what we call the full committee. On the next page, on page 66, you have one of the subcommittees of that full committee. And that subcommittee, that House Subcommittee on Federal Workforce, U.S. Postal Service, and Labor Policy, is at the heart of the formulation of policy and legislation within the Congress as it deals with the Postal Service and it deals with the General Civil Service. If you have as your lawmaker, your House lawmaker, one of those Republicans or Democrats, you are in the catbird seat of importance for NAPS. Those Republicans and Democrats are critical to good relationships and an in-depth understanding of the Postal Service. You have a special responsibility to NAPS to assure that they are plugged in to our agenda. And the same thing applies to the Senate on page 67. We listed the same membership there as you find on page 66 at the full committee level, but then we drilled down to the subcommittee on federal financial management, government information, federal services, that implicates the Postal Service, and international security. And there's the subcommittee. You recall I threw up the picture there of Senator Carper and Senator Brown. That's the subcommittee. Carper chairs that subcommittee. He's the leading Democrat on that committee. Scott Brown is the leading Republican. But those other folks, Levin, Akaka, Pryor, McCaskill, Begich, and then on the Republican side, Coburn, McCain, Johnson, and Portman are also really, really key. If you have as your senators those people, you are also in an incredibly important position in terms of your responsibility to work with those senators, to work with their staff, to have a really, really, really good relationship. Okay? Just want to underscore that all the rest of the members of Congress are important because of the local relationship they have to the Postal Service. But when it comes to actually moving legislation through, it's particularly important about those 40 and 17 members of the House and the Senate. Okay. Last year, we had a number of items on our issues agenda that you folks so ably took to the Hill. This year, we have 3 issues, only 3. And actually, the 3 are not necessarily equal importance to the others. The foremost issue is what I call the money stuff that deals, if we could bring up the slide, that deals with the restructuring of Postal Service's pension and retiree health benefits. The second deals with the business model for the Postal Service and reinventing and changing, which we are continuing to do. The Postmaster General talked about that. You're in the midst of it, but there's still much more that remains. And then the last deals with, frankly, an issue that is first and foremost on the minds of many in Congress. And it's incumbent upon us to address it and to clarify and avoid any misperceptions about where the Postal Service fits into the nation's budget and its deficit and its debt burden, where postal employees fit into that, and to clear out any misperceptions there as well. We're going to walk through those 3 issues now for the next 40 minutes or so. So let's start with the first one. And what we're going to do is bounce around a little bit between the book and the talking points. The talking points will be covered, you're going to find, in a script-like way this afternoon during the mock congressional visit, the role play that our Florida folks are going to do. So follow along this afternoon as they walk through that. You might make some notes. We're going to talk about things to do, things not to do, and learn from that experience. When you walk into the congressional visit tomorrow, your state legislative chairs have copies of these legislative issues briefs that they're going to be giving to you to in turn give one to the staffer with whom you're going to be meeting. You're going to get another copy, but we're going to ask you to hold that and in turn put that into the hands of the lawmaker when you meet with the lawmaker back in the district over the next couple of weeks. Okay? Use one copy tomorrow, but use the next one that you're going to get from your state legislative chair when you meet with the lawmaker. Now, bills, pieces of legislation. During the last Congress, we had bills that were offered in the closing days of the last Congress, the 111th Congress, by Senator Tom Carper in the top row there on the far left, Senator Susan Collins, and Congressman Stephen Lynch. At the end of a Congress, any bills that have been introduced die. Doesn't matter where they are in the process. They could have already been reported out of committee. They could have already been approved by one chamber of the Congress and sent over to the other body. You could even have bills that are similar, not identical, approved by the House and the Senate, but they haven't finally reconciled one bill that they both agree on. No matter how far along, without actual passage and signature by the president, they die. And at the start of the next Congress, you've got to start all the way over again. You've got to introduce a bill, have hearings on it, possibly. You don't have to have a hearing, I'm sorry. You could have a hearing on it, but you have to move it through committee once again. So where are we in this Congress? Can you have the pictures again, once again? We do not have the Carper bill, which was a comprehensive bill dealing with the first issue as well as the second issue. We do have a bill that's been introduced by Senator Susan Collins, but we don't have a bill that's been introduced by Congressman Lynch. Why are the people included on the bottom row? Well, we do have a bill that's been introduced by Congressman Sam Graves of Missouri. We'll get to that in just a moment. We're expecting a bill by Congressman Connolly, whom we'll hear from tomorrow. And we're wondering, are we going to be seeing a bill that Congressman Ross, who chairs our subcommittee in the House, is he going to be offering a bill? And what will it address? Now, we're relatively early still in this Congress. After all, they came into office in January. Here we are yet in March. Can't put a lot of blame at their feet for not having introduced major bills. We are surprised that Senator Carper hasn't reintroduced his bill yet. He is telling us that he will likely introduce another comprehensive bill next month. And I think what he would like to hope to do is actually get Senator Collins to come on, drop her original bill, and join with him. That hasn't happened yet, and I'm not sure that is going to happen. And Congressman Lynch has indicated that he will likely reintroduce his bill once again. Now, what do each of these bills do? The Carper bill and the Collins bills are comprehensive bills. They deal not only with the pre-funding issue, but they also deal with the co-location of post offices in retail facilities. They deal with greater flexibility for the Postal Service with respect to how it closes post offices. They deal with adding to the collective bargaining laws new requirements for arbitrators to take into account, which have the unions going ballistic. And they raise a number of policy issues above and beyond our foremost concern, and that is dealing with the money. The Lynch bill, when he introduces it, only deals with the money. And we like that. Why? Because all these other policy issues, quite frankly, are controversial. Many of them are controversial, and it detracts from the attention that has to be focused on the money and getting the Postal Service relief before September 30th. Because one of the very first things you want to say when you walk into the congressional office is that, hey, we're doing great things, but due to two colossal errors made by Congress and by the bureaucracy, we are running out of cash. And we are going to be insolvent by September 30th. We are going to be at the point of what if it were a private company, bankruptcy. Now, it doesn't mean that we will be declaring Chapter 11. The Postmaster General did not indicate today, but he did to the Congress when he testified 3 weeks ago, that when that retiree health benefit payment of $5.5 billion comes due, that if the money isn't there to pay it, they're just going to step back. The Postal Service will step back and will not pay it. And it will honor its obligations for payroll. It will honor its obligations for vendors. But it's not going to write another check for $5.5 billion if Congress hasn't stepped up to the plate and helped to solve this situation. And that's good. I mean, that Postmaster General Potter, for the great things that he had done in the past, never had the courage to tell the Congress, listen, we're not going to be able to make this payment and we're not going to pay it. Otherwise, it's going to put us in the red. It would exceed the $15 billion debt limit that the Postal Service has. So you're going to have to spend a little bit of time talking about the nature of these two colossal errors. And let's spend just a moment talking about them, because it's a little bit complicated, but you want to keep it simple. I'm going to share with you some details this morning for your own edification, for your own information, so you feel more comfortable. But you don't have to share all this information with the staffer with whom you're meeting, or even the lawmaker later. But I want you to know it. Stick to the script. That's the abbreviated way we address it. First of all, when you sit down with the congressman and with the staffer tomorrow, more immediately, we want to talk a little bit about the most important things about the Postal Service, and those are reflected on the very first page there, on page 1, the 5 things to know about the Postal Service. You don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but I would suggest you really amplify. Feel free at the beginning of the meeting to hand over the brief then. You can kind of walk through. Take along your own copy. The only thing you need to take to the Hill should be this blue sheet and an issue brief. Leave your binder at home. You don't have to take it. If you want to, you might want to slip out the page that's got the map of the Hill there. There's a map in your directory, but you might want to pull out that map as well as the directions to the Capitol Visitor Center. Leave your binder at home. You don't need to take that to the Hill. But you want to emphasize those 5 points. And included, even in number 3, the 5 points being no tax dollars support the Postal Service. Second, the postal system is an economic engine for the nation. When you're talking about the numbers of jobs that it creates, talk about the number of jobs within the Postal Service that it creates in the district. Your delegation will have, each delegation will have for each lawmaker and each visit that you make, each congressional office, an economic impact statement. Your state legislative chair has that data. That's data that we got from the Postal Service just a couple weeks ago that shows how much in tax revenue the Postal Service generates for the district, how many facilities it has in the district, and how many jobs and dollars it creates. That's incredibly important for the congressional office to know that and understand that. And that comes about at the bottom of your talking points there on the very first page. Fill in those blanks with regard to jobs and tax dollars. If we're going to contribute to the nation's economy and call ourselves an economic engine, that helps to verify it. They need to know that in terms of the importance and how that implicates not only jobs within the Postal Service, but also that ripple effect, you know well, of all the other people that rely on the Postal Service and those ancillary industries in printing and publishing, in direct mail, in advertising that rely upon the Postal Service in terms of their product line. And then move on to talk a little bit about the degree to which the universal service obligation is so important and how that distinguishes the Postal Service and its responsibilities from FedEx and UPS. And then underscore the constitutional obligation of the Postal Service And it's tied in right there at the bottom of the page there, on page 1. The USO originates, that's the Universal Service Obligation, originates from the constitutional obligation of the Fed to maintain and operate post offices. Talk just a moment about 6 years in a row that we've won this Ponemon Institute Award for highest degree of trust by the American people, greater than any other component within the federal government. And then lastly, our stewardship of being green and increasingly green, the size of the vehicle fleet, the massiveness of really what we're talking about in terms of the commercial enterprise that the Postal Service is, and how it is, in a sense, and as Lewis said earlier this morning, too big to fail. And then we move right into issue number 1, which deals with the finances and how the heck this whole matter of these losses came about, and the degree to which these 2 mistakes that have been created by Congress and the Office of Personnel Management came about. This was an avoidable crisis. We have on page 5 2 important charts. Let's just spend a moment talking about them. The 2 mistakes were, 1, the mistake of Congress in the 2006 Postal Reform Law, saddling the Postal Service with responsibility for pre-funding retiree health benefits. Now, we think that the responsibility to pay ahead your future obligations for retiree health benefits was actually a good thing, even though there's no other component within the government that has that responsibility. For the Postal Service, given its size, given the uncertainty of the business model, it was actually wise to start to put that money ahead. The problem was that Congress tried to squash into 40 years of future payments 10 years of payments. And when you look at the chart on page 4, figure 1, you'll see the degree to which over time, that law got passed in 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way through 2016, the way that adds up to over $50 billion that the Postal Service is required to pay ahead for its future benefits for retiree health. Keeping in mind escalating health costs over that period. The reason why Congress put that into 10 years was for the bill, when it passed it, to score neutrally under its budget laws. That's the only reason it did that. It backed into a dumbass budget requirement, quite frankly, that forced the Congress, forced the Postal Service into the red. So now let's go over to page 3. Here's how you prove it. Page 5, sorry, figure 3. Look at figure number 2. The line at the top there, the black line, the solid line, that's the expense line, operating expenses. You can see, where did they really start to ramp up? Where did our operating expenses really start to ramp up? 2007. When did the retiree health benefit funding obligation kick in? 2007. Now, the Postal Service, you all have done a great job in continuing to cut costs, but still, you can see operating expenses have exceeded revenues. And of course, revenues have fallen, particularly because of the economy and the depth of the recession. You know, volume dropped from 216 billion pieces down to about 170 billion pieces.